I am, so great. And then anyone else who joins will get the message that it's being recorded. So this is it's an intimate group. I expect maybe a couple more people, or hope a couple more people will join before the call is over. But we're going to spend an hour today with Nadine and I want to say Chief Harris, but Wayne, retired police chief. Before I start, I just want to tell you a little bit about why we decided to create this speaker series. And then I'm going to give you a little bit, I could talk about their backgrounds, but I think I'd let them talk about their backgrounds because I think that's more interesting and we're informal. And then because it's a small group, I do want people to jump in and ask questions. I mean, we have people on the phone who are really familiar with our work, but not everyone's familiar with Wayne. So not everyone's heard from him. And so it's just a new voice in our conversation, but he's been a thought partner with us all along. So I think you see the benefit of his work. You just haven't actually seen him or heard from him directly. So I'm super excited that he's here with us today. And so we decided to launch this series. Actually, it was born, I think, out of the pressure we were feeling at the end of Black History Month to put out something, right? Because it was Black History Month, and we hadn't actually shared anything as an organization. And it kind of struck us that these months, days, events are really important for raising awareness for underrepresented communities, but our stories don't end with the day, the month, or the week, right? These are ongoing stories and ongoing experiences. And it's important for us to, have these conversations all year long. And there's real value in that. And we see that if you just look at the events of 2020, I think it's the ongoing conversation that is really driving the social change that we're seeing. Or at least I can't say we're seeing social change, but certainly the grappling, right? The real public grappling with these issues that we're all, that many of us have lived, forever. So with that, we decided to launch the speaker series because the other thing that we know is these killings of Black and brown people, right, by police have occurred. They occur frequently. Sometimes we see them in the media and it creates a reaction. But unfortunately, the focus is lost after the immediate moment. And hence this moments to movements, right? So for us, this is really about meeting the moment and finding a way to keep the focus on the conversation so that we can really drive the kind of systemic change that the initiative was born is seeking to do. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to, I'm going to start with Wayne. So he can tell us a little bit about himself, his background, and then Nadine will do the same.
So thank you, Emma. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, and I guess Gary, good evening. You being in Ireland. By the way, I wish I was there. That would be kind of cool. I've always wanted to visit. My name is Wayne Harris, and I am a retired deputy chief of police from Rochester, New York. And unfortunately, Rochester has been in the news very often lately for a number of things that have occurred. I retired back in 2017. My last assignment with them was the deputy chief of community engagement relations. Prior to that, I was a deputy chief of administration, and my position changed because of some incidents that had occurred in the city of Rochester. One of which was an arrest during an open air drug market investigation where a woman entered into the scenario. She was the boyfriend of one of the individuals that we were arresting, and she decided to not only interject herself into the situation, but then also resist arrest. It ended up that an officer sort of chased her into a front yard, tackled her to the ground, and of course it was captured on cell phone video and posted and went viral. Uh, Shortly thereafter, a Black Lives Matter rally occurred in the city of Rochester where a number of people, probably around 400, took over an intersection in the city, two arterial roads that basically blocked everything for quite a while. And when it came time for us to disperse that group, it ended up resulting in us arresting 74 individuals and also detaining two African American reporters, which did not go over very well. In fact, the detention of the reporters is what caused CNN and other national media to come in and say, okay, there's a problem in Rochester. Following those two events, the City Council of the City of Rochester convened a public hearing where the public was invited in and allowed to voice their opinion of the Rochester Police Department. And quite honestly, for the next few hours, we were called basically everything that we can be called under the sun, except great at what we did. Um, the mayor thought that since so many people came in and voiced their opinion, that it would be a good idea for us to go out and actually find out specifically how the community felt, and then to also bring back recommendations from the community as to how we could improve. So she changed my position from the deputy chief of administration to the deputy chief of community engagement and relations. And I continued that work for about a year and a half. Developed something that we ended up calling the Blueprint for Engagement, which not only captured the recommendations that we received from the community, but also strategies that were designed to improve the engagement and the relationship between the Rochester Police Department and the people that they served. But after I left the department, I thought, how can I continue to serve? I didn't have any burning desire to be back in a uniform, but I thought, how can I continue to do the work that I'm doing? How can I use the experience that I have? How can I use the knowledge that I have to further this conversation, to facilitate sometimes very difficult conversations in this particular equation? And Emma, I want to sort of piggyback on one of the things that you said relative to when things happen in our country, and for a minute we're all very angry, and for a minute we're saying what we say, and then we get quiet until the next time something happens. The other reason why forums like this are a good idea is because, unfortunately, negativity sells in our media, negativity sells in our news streams. They want to hear about all of the bad that's occurring. So forums like this offer a counterbalance to that narrative. Forums like this allow us to tell not only the truth about policing, because that's a huge influencer in this relationship, the fact that there's a lot of information that's not known on both sides. So I'm thankful that we're doing this, by the way, since I've left. And unfortunately, most recently, the reason Rochester has been in the news is back about a year ago, almost this week. A gentleman by the name of Daniel Prude was involved in an altercation with the Rochester Police Department. He was experiencing a psychotic episode. He was also high on a pretty significant narcotic. And when the officers came upon him in the middle of the night, they ordered him to the ground, and he complied. They handcuffed him very quickly. But unfortunately, because of his involvement with the narcotic, he began to get verbally combative, not physically combative, because he really couldn't. I should mention also that he was naked at the time that this entire event occurred. But at some point, he decided to get up, and officers made the decision to stabilize him on the ground, and it resulted in him asphyxiating, and he passed away about a week after the incident. The medical examiner has ruled that particular incident a homicide. That sparked off a number of protests, which on occasion became violent here in the city of Rochester, similar to what occurred after George Floyd happened. Most recently, we had a situation where a 9-year-old girl was present during a domestic dispute between her mother and father. Decided she was going to, run out of the situation, threatening to harm herself. An officer pursued. At some point, the officer made the decision that she needed to get into the backseat of a police car. So while she was screaming, "I want my dad, I want my dad, I want my dad," he decided it was a good idea to handcuff her. And when she refused to get into the backseat of a police car, they decided to pepper spray a 9-year-old girl in an effort to force her in. Those are examples of unfortunately some of the state of policing here in the United States. And then they're examples of why we're having this conversation in the first place, some of the work that still needs to be done. But this is how we get there. This is actually how we accomplish fixing this. It's by having open and honest and very frank dialogue on the deficiencies of policing and what's necessary to move us to that next place, which is hopefully a much better place.
Wow. I mean, that was just great. And there's so much. I feel like I could just dash my notes and just like
I
just
know.
keep going, but I'm not. But you know, I'll try to pick up on some of those threads. It's just there's so much. Nadine, I'm just gonna turn the floor to you first.
Well, I mean, I'll give the bio, but let me start with the approach that we chose to take, just to kind of tie in with what Wayne just said, which is immediately when we decided to form this organization, myself, Emma, and a third co-founder, Vicki Robinson, we took the approach that it was going to be collaborative. So that kind of ties into exactly what Wayne was just talking about. From the beginning, even though we were hurting, and I'll go back into what happened leading up to that decision, but we knew right away that we had to have difficult conversations. We knew right away that every stakeholder had to be involved, had to be seen and heard. We knew right away this could not be resolved in isolation of just the Black and Brown communities, or even with legislators, without engaging the police. So that is the approach that we decided on. We received some pushback from both sides of the, let's not get political, both communities, the Blue community, the Black community, and so forth. But we held our ground. And in fact, we embedded it in our name, the initiative Advancing the Blue and Black Partnership. That is what grounds us, and everything that we do. So starting now a little bit backwards in terms of why we chose to do this and who I am. I'm Nadine Jones, a 2003 graduate of Howard Law School, and I'm a corporate attorney. Pretty boring, you know, for the most part. I love my job. And what happened in April, starting in April 2020, leading up to the death of George Floyd and thereafter, was a state of being that we, as co-founders of the initiative, we simply couldn't sit by the sidelines any longer. We were overwhelmed, but not just overwhelmed. We made a decision not to normalize this fear that we had normalized for our entire lives, and generations before us did the same. So starting with the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, the viral video with that was shocking. It shocked our consciousness. It was not a police officer who killed him. It was a retired police officer, but the whole incident was just, it confirmed that as mothers of Black children, Black boys in particular, even the most innocuous activity, we felt helpless to protect them. When we see danger coming, it's one thing. Going up for a jog, it was a shock to our consciousness. And then shortly thereafter, was the George Floyd killing. And that was the point where we said, okay, we are going to get into this space. We are Howard trained. We are corporate attorneys. We have a compliance background. We understand very clearly, very vividly, that there is a distinction between policy on paper and culture that's lived out on a day-to-day, ordinary course of business, day-to-day activity. So we knew that where our children lived wasn't necessarily in the world of policy, although that certainly has importance and has impact on the day-to-day realities of local officers, foot patrol, and just ordinary citizens on the block. But we knew that there is a big space between policy on paper and the culture that's actually lived out. And our children live in the world where police interaction with citizens is in the cultural space. So we partnered quickly with various members of our network, and we found folks like Wayne Harris here and others of like-minded ilk, and we formed the initiative to bridge that divide, to first of all determine what the best practices were for creating more harmonious, maybe I shouldn't say more, but harmonious relationships between members of the brown community, members of the Black community, and the members of the blue community, and all community members, quite frankly, and our police. And we settled pretty quickly on community policing. What does that mean? It means a lot of different things to different people. But for professionals such as Wayne and others who have done it well, there is a certain method to doing it well. And we analyzed it, we studied it, and we created, I'm getting a little bit ahead, but we created something to measure it, which we will demo for you later on after we get through some of these finished discussing. So that's the bio for me.
So you know, both of you touched on this, and it was something I had in my intro, but I didn't say. But there's this phrase that that we hear often. And I think it started with Martin Luther King, right? The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Yes.
But it doesn't just bend; you have to push on the arc, right? And that's sort of the modern day addition. And I think that's really what we're saying here. That we know that change will come if we keep pushing. And so it's really critically important that we keep our focus on this. And let's not even be deterred by the fact that this call is small, because these conversations start small and they can grow. And we really intend to take this and seed it, right? And keep really keep people engaged and listening. So Wayne, you've been, you know, I don't remember exactly how our paths collided, right? How you met Nadine, but you've been a friend to the initiative, a true advisor, a real thought partner. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes the initiative different, like what makes our approach different. I mean, people have, and I think Nadine alluded to this, have been, this is not a new issue, right? We know it's been around for a really long time. And in between, you know, Ahmaud and George Floyd, there was Breonna Taylor, there was the Central Park Karen, you know, after George Floyd, there was Rayshard Brooks. And, you know, before Ahmaud, there were many others, right? So, so I think the question is, you know, so many people, and you pointed this out, like even in your work in Rochester, you've done some, you know, you started some work designed to address these very issues. So the initiative is yet another organization that's trying to crack this nut. What makes us different in your view?
So, well, that's actually an easy question to answer. But before I do, let me say this to your point about the smallness of this conversation today. Historically and globally, the only way change has ever really occurred is when a small group of people get together and decide that it's time for change to occur. And when I speak to students, that's one of the things that I often tell them. And I have this very strange analogy that I give, which I won't give right here because, you know, it would distract from our conversation. And maybe after we're done, I'll relate it. But the reason that or what sets you guys apart is that you are not police based. There are a number of organizations around the country right now that are trying to do some similar work. Many of them, however, though, are, you know, law enforcement officers that have gotten together and said, you know, okay, we need to make a difference. We need to make a change. One of the organizations that I happen to be the chairman of is LEAP, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But you guys sort of have the distinction of being a group of citizens that decided, you know what, I can't sit back and just kind of watch this anymore. I want to do something about it. And not necessarily coming from a law enforcement background, but, you know, in Nadine's case, she's a corporate attorney, so the law is important to her. I've looked all through, you know, your team, and you're comprised of people from all different aspects of society that have determined that this is important and we want to make a difference. And the program that we're going to talk about, that Nadine's going to introduce a little bit later, is similar to some of the programs around the country. The difference being that there are certain performance measurements that you guys are looking at that others don't necessarily look at. For example, there's an organization here in Rochester called Measures for Justice, and they've had the idea of putting together, you know, a dashboard or a data portal, if you will, to provide to law enforcement organizations so that they can be better. The problem, and it's not a problem, but the difference is that the metrics that they've put together, the performance data that they're gathering is, number of traffic stops, number of arrests that occur, how many uses of force occur here and there. And that's good stuff. Those are good metrics to gather because it does give, the police a good snapshot. But there's another side to this, and you guys are capturing information like organizational development, like community engagement. Those are important because without that relationship between police and the community, policing can't occur. One of the things I tell people when I lecture is, honestly, there's not a police agency on the planet that has the resources to manage all of the quality of life issues that they face, that their communities face on a daily basis. They just don't. The other thing is that most police agencies and even the large national agencies that exist here in the world, they do what all of us do. They take resources, they put it here. Something else happens down the street, they pull those resources, they move them down the street. So they're constantly moving stuff around and just taking those resources, shuffling them. The only way this actually works is by collaboration with the community, getting the community's input, developing strategies that require neighbors, citizens, police, everyone, business, education to come to the table, figure this out, take a very, strong, objective look at the problem that you are mutually facing and develop a strategy to address it. That's technically the definition of community policing. It's not, an officer stepping out of his car, going up and waving and saying hi and hey, my name is Wayne or my name is Mr. Harris or Officer Harris. That's all great. And that's a part of good engagement strategy. But true community policing is born from that relationship, that collaboration that exists and is necessary for a community to be healthy.
I love that. And Jeff, I know I didn't tell you that I was going to put you on the spot, but I might put you on the spot because it's a small group. But I think what Wayne just said really makes me feel like I should ask you, you are, and the work that Kaizen has done with us at the initiative is critical to everything that we do, frankly, right? Because we've identified a problem, we've identified the solution, as Wayne just so articulately explained. And you're giving us a sort of modern day tool to achieve the goal that we're trying to accomplish. But I want to just ask you, and the reason I could put you on the spot is because I'm just asking for your feelings, your thoughts, right? As a citizen, just an everyday person who just, you came across the work we were doing or we were about to do, what made you decide to get involved? And what is it about this project that makes Kaizen want to stay involved? Because you could have ran away a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah, we sure could have, but there was no way we were going to. Well, first, when it, I think at the time there was an element of the time that we just felt like, all right, we got to do something. We got to figure out something to help. Then when we happened to hear, on thelaw.com, when the interview or the thing that you had done, Amma, it just spoke to us in terms of where we come from, the world where we come from, data and analytics, and you were really trying to leverage, data analytics compliance and then, kind of the legal professional angle. And we just felt like, hey, that's what we're good at. And, let us contribute that. And, I think you also were looking to do things quickly, which we're pretty good at that too. So we stood, but we got your vision. We completely believe that there is a problem that needs to be solved. And while we didn't understand until we got involved, the community policing, community engagement component of it, as that came to life, and it just makes all the sense in the world for us, from our standpoint. So it was easy to get behind. It's easy to, stay right there with you and continue to use our talents of data and analytics. And, what's nice also about our space is that, as Wayne had said, being able to pull a lot of those core data components that are differentiated, maybe than what's out there, but then there's also a frontier of things that we could do to help you as you do things like more on the predictive side, right? So more historic, where we're looking at stuff what's happened in the past, or what's happened, versus then now taking that and projecting out, you know, what could we do? What could it look like? So it feels like there's a long, opportunity space there. And I mean, I don't know if I wasn't.
That's perfect. No, that's
definitely
perfect.
put me on the spot.
I know, but it's just because I want people to hear, first of all, because you joined the call, you're a great partner also. And because I also want people to hear and realize that it's the point that Wayne just made, right? Like, we think of change as this grand thing that just occurs, right? But frequently what we see then is the result of like a lot of little steps and a lot of people, individual people, small groups of people, just working hard at something. And it's sort of the ordinariness of who we are, right? Just trying to move this forward and push this boulder up the hill. I think I just want to really emphasize to folks that change is within our hands, right? We are the ones who can actually, create the future that we want to see. So that's why I asked you to jump in. So Wayne, I want to switch gears a little bit. I know this is a conversation, sort of to talk about the work that the initiative is doing, but I also would love to hear a little bit about the work that you're doing now in your new role as the chair of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Did I get that right? LEAP? Okay. Would love to hear a little bit about that.
So LEAP was organized in 2002 by 5 police officers, again, a small group of individuals that were initially concerned with drug policies in the United States and how they negatively impacted the BIPOC community and communities that were impacted more socioeconomically than others were. And they recognized that the drug policies were impacting, the incarceration rates. They were contributing to the prison industrial complex, to contributing to the school to prison pipeline. They wanted to make a difference, so they started something that it was initially called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. But because of the cultural change that became apparently necessary in the law enforcement industry, they altered themselves to the Law Enforcement Action Partnership to address a more broad spectrum of concerns in policing and law enforcement. And right now, we're engaged in public speaking. We have over 200 speakers that speak globally for us. We actually have we have an individual member in the UK. We're beginning to look at Scotland. There's some conversations about opening it up in Scotland. So Gary, I may in fact get to see you one day face to face. And we're also branching off into South America. So, it's now we not only do we have our speakers bureau, but we also assist in legislation. We're frequently asked to provide testimony to government entities that want to know a little bit more about policing, about the law enforcement industry. We are not all police officers. We have law professors, we have prosecutors, we have defense attorneys, we have obviously police officers. We have people that aren't just deputy chiefs of police, but guys that have been out there doing frontline stuff. We've tried to develop a speakers bureau that is reflective of all aspects of policing, so that we can have a voice in all aspects of policing. And right now we're in fact, most recently we put out a report called Community Responders, which speaks to the development of very highly trained individuals that can respond to things that have historically been given to policing, mostly because the entities that should be responding to them don't really exist. It was brought about by way of everything that's going on with George Floyd, with Daniel Prude, and many of the other incidents that we hear around the country where people are questioning whether police needed to be sent to that particular incident in the first place. So our community responder model is now out in the public. We're having some conversations with different municipalities on how we can help them develop that community responder model. And they approached me, you asked a question earlier about how I connected with Nadine. I connected with Nadine through one of our advisors on the initiative, Giles Ship. Giles is a past national president for another organization that I belong to. It's called Noble. It stands for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I served on their national executive board for a number of years. But we kind of, the way we got together was, we had a question pertaining to Noble, and we reached out to Nadine, and Nadine was nice enough to sort of, get on the phone with Giles and I one evening, and it was late into the evening, and, the conversation developed to such a degree that, later on, Nadine and I reconnected and said, let's continue this conversation because there's some stuff that we can work on.
Awesome.
So, here we are, fast forward to how we can fix this, and those conversations that are occurring right now around, the George Floyd incident and the Ahmaud Arbery incident and the Breonna Taylor incident and even the Daniel Pruitt incident have illustrated some areas that can be adjusted in policing. And please note, I didn't say improved upon, but there is an adjustment that does need to occur. The improvement, I think, is going to come in different areas of responsibility for police, but the adjustment that needs to occur, and for the sake of conversation, we'll talk about people in mental health crisis. The question is it necessary to send an armed police officer to someone who's suffering a mental health crisis? Perhaps not. The community responder model has aspects in it that speak to training a cadre of individuals that can go out and address, but can also work in conjunction with police for those incidents when a uniformed police officer is necessary to manage that particular situation. So the Law Enforcement Action Partnership is, it spoke to me because their purpose and their mission was very much in line with what I said I wanted to do after I retired from policing. And initially, Giles pulled me in and said, "Hey, I think you'd be great to be a speaker." He's also a speaker for us. And so I did. And shortly thereafter, they said, "You know what, we kind of like, what you're doing. We'd love for you to be a recruiter for us." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll be a recruiter." And I started recruiting people to be a speaker. And about a year ago now, I got a call out of the blue saying that they wanted me to join their board, and never expected it, didn't expect it. But I said absolutely, because it allowed me an opportunity to become even more involved in this organization and perhaps try to help steer this organization towards, that which, in my opinion, are the most critical areas of need for the law enforcement industry. And then this part, I absolutely don't know how this occurred, but sometime in December of this past year, during a board meeting when our executive director was leaving, it was his last board member, or his last official meeting as our executive director. Our new executive director was coming in. We were taking nominations for board chair. I was purposefully remaining very, very silent because I had only been on the board for a short period of time and didn't think I was ever going to qualify to be board chair until one of the board members spoke up and said, "I nominate Wayne." And after she got done speaking, the first person that had been nominated basically rescinded his acceptance of the nomination, and
Wow.
I was voted in. So it was surprising, but I embraced it, and I'm trying to run with it, and we're going to change the world.
Oh, I love that.
At a time.
I love that. That's so amazing. You actually touched on something. I want to switch gears. I know we're getting, time just flies when you're having fun. I also, Gary, Ashley, Mark, Jeff, if anyone has questions, just jump in, raise your hand. Just give me a wave, and I'll, feel free if you have a burning question for Wayne or Nadine. I'm gonna let Nadine do a brief demo of Central for those who haven't seen it before. But Wayne, I have a question that ties to what you just, and it comes up, I think, later in my, in my list, but it doesn't matter. So I'd like you to, in fact, I actually put this question in my rapid fire, so you didn't even know it was a question I had for you. But I'm curious. So, you know, there are people who believe that community policing leads to the over-policing of communities of color. And when you talked about the way LEAP was founded, or who founded LEAP, I think I was actually thinking about that, right? Which is that we know that with the crack epidemic, for example, the response to that was very different than the response to the opioid epidemic, which primarily impacted poor communities, but communities that were largely white. And so the concern that we've heard, I think, from people who are probably more aligned with the defund movement, they feel really strongly that community policing, all that does is put more police in communities with Black and brown people, who then proceed to over police and incarcerate and put, you know, sort of like pull them up into the criminal justice system. What are your thoughts on that?
So the flaw in that particular belief is that they're only focusing on the enforcement aspect of policing, and that's nowhere near the whole of what is true community policing. And community policing is exactly as I described it earlier. It is a collaboration. So if I'm going into a community that is, you know, socioeconomically impacted to the point of poverty, and because of the redistricting or the redlining that occurred in the history of that municipality, the majority of the people that live there are people of color. Community policing means that regardless of who lives in that community, I'm going to go in as a police officer. I'm going to sit down with Mr. Harris and I'm going to say, Mr. Harris, I understand you're a little bit concerned about the drug dealing that's going on out here. What can we do to change this? Well, I'll tell you, one of the things we could do is we could take care of this stupid empty lot over here with all those bushes that are sky high that all these drug dealers hide in. Okay, well, let's figure out how we can trim back those bushes, maybe put a light in there, put a bench in there, put a house in there if that's what we need to do. That's actually called CPTED, crime prevention through crime prevention through environmental design. It's a process. It's actually a strategy, but it comes about by way of that conversation with Mr. Harris. It's not me going up and saying, you know, come here, Mr. Harris, get off the block. Or come here, Mr. Harris, you know, what's that you have in that bag? That's not community policing. Nor is community policing just walking by and going, hey, Mr. Harris. Community policing, regardless of where it's occurring, is essentially about figuring out how to through collaboration, address those issues that are mutually impactful to everyone.
I love that.
And one of the things that I try to get people, I used to, I know we only have a couple of minutes. I'm just going to give you a real brief history of me and part of the way that I got to my philosophy of policing. When I became a police officer, my father told me to remember that I had to come back and live in the neighborhood that I was going to be serving, and that I might have to be one of those people that called the police. The other bit of advice I got was from a gentleman that had known me since I was a kid. His son and I were friends, and he knew all the dumb stuff that me and his son used to go out and do. And when he found out I was going to become a police officer, he pulled me aside and he said, don't forget, you're not so very far away from the people that you're going to be working with. And what he was saying was, I know all the dumb stuff you and Derek did. And don't think that that couldn't be you. And they were both 100% right. So I never approached this as, you know, me working at someone or on someone. It was always about me working with someone. And that's why whenever I lecture, I always use the phrase with, or Nadine will appreciate this. And it's not an either or situation. It's an and situation.
That's for another speaker series coming up. Polarity thinking.
But I like that.
Yeah.
He's just.
Yeah.
So Gary had a question. Samina had a question. I think I see some. Both of you want to jump in.
Go ahead, Gary.
I suppose the question, Chief, and I'll call you Chief as a serving officer myself, Community policing done properly is expensive. The expense and the cultural difficulty of getting buy-in, because it's not rewarded, it's not valued. It's like, I don't think I've ever seen a police force actually implement community policing. I've seen elements of community policing being delivered by regular units. I've seen the public relations part of community policing, the smiling, the ice cream, the playing sports with young people, but never an equity focused actual delivery of community policing anywhere. Because to take the time to win trusts of communities that it's been lost in takes officers who are willing to meet communities where they're at. And that's difficult for a chief or for a politician to measure on metrics of performance. It's one of the big barriers to community policing being implemented successfully, is that there's a long lead in time for change, and it's difficult for the politicians or for the chief to put it down on a spreadsheet when he's going for his next promotion or his next budget.
Mhm.
I love that you said that, Gary.
I think
Oh, go ahead, Wayne.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say it actually underscores why this is important to businesses, right? I mean, I think we could, you know, we actually have created this tool. We're not trying to sell this tool to police agencies. We actually feel strongly that that's not the right way to go. But we think it's really important for businesses that are really and companies that are really thinking about how they show up in this moment, how they meet the moment, that they really understand that investments in our communities, that would actually inure to the benefit not only of the communities, but also of our police, is what we need, right? So done right, it's expensive, but we're putting resources into all kinds of things, spending money on all kinds of things. As companies think about how they do social good and invest in corporate social responsibility, I think this is an area where they need to invest. And I'm really proud that my company, G6 Hospitality, has, and Nadine's company has, and Kaizen has. I mean, I think it's critically important if we want to, Kuehne Nagel and Microsoft, and Lumina and Kava. I mean, without these investments, the change that we're seeking is just not going to come. So
Can I just, before you start this portion of the presentation, I just want to speak to, because Gary's 1000% correct. The other aspect of this is that the community policing, the concept of community policing has not been universally embraced by everyone. There's a problem. Some actually don't understand what it means, but some simply just don't embrace it. And here's the challenge. The law enforcement industry, the culture of policing, is a slow turning ship. It's very, very, very difficult to get them to see the necessity of making the change that Gary's talking about. So he's right in that the individuals that are truly doing the community policing work are those captains that are out there, guiding a section of the city, or those sergeants that are guiding a squad of individual officers. That has to be embraced. It falls to the chief of police or the chief executive officer to set the culture and the tone of policing in that area, but it needs to, and you have to figure a way to get it to trickle down to those individuals that are face-to-face interacting with the community members that they're working with. Second, and the last thing I'll say is this. You touched on something that's very, very critically important, and we'll just take the concept of, the community responder model that I mentioned. Here's the problem. Part of the reason why police are the ones sent to these things in the first place is because municipalities have been reluctant to set it as a priority to pay for it permanently. So if me as a mayor decide, we used to have this program called Entry to Care here. If I say I'm going to fund Entry to Care so that every homeless person suffering from alcohol abuse, drug abuse, I'm going to fund this organization because I recognize it as necessary. Here's money for it. Have at it. I want you to help my people on the street. If my successor comes in and says, I like sidewalks better, and I want to make sure that there are brilliant sidewalks everywhere in the community, that money that was spent for something like Entry to Care generally gets pulled, and the responsibility for taking care of those issues, like responding to people with mental health crisis, inevitably reverts to policing. because of that one temporary aspect of the fact that there could be some violence involved. If you can fix that, if you can get municipalities to not only embrace the concept of community policing, but also make permanent the necessary change to social entities, then you can actually begin to fix this.
I love that. And that goes to, you know, the conversation that we'll have after Central, which is on defunding, right? Defunding versus, you know, funding and, you know, and public safety in
Yes.
general. So
Right.
Nadine, you want
Well,
to?
part of also what we're doing with the initiative, we are also educating the community. So as the community becomes more educated and knowledgeable about what community policing is, then that's power for them to start to compel, or to at least not compel, but certainly to exercise influence and pressure on the local municipalities that they elect. That can be something that they will expect from the mayor to hire a chief that can do community policing and do it well. Gary, I loved how you mentioned the word trust, because in all of what we were talking about in terms of the collaboration that Wayne was talking about, in terms of proactive policing in collaboration with the community, though, yes, the end product of safer communities and environmental, I'm going to have to look that up. That was criminal crime prevention through environmental. Okay, I'll look it up after.
Environmental
It's called-
design.
it's CPTED, crime
CPTED.
prevention
There's
through
a great
environmental design.
piece in the Washington Post 7-part series that discusses that.
Okay, I'm going to, I know Samita's been asking me to read that. I will definitely read that.
That's episode number 6.
But certainly the act of clearing out the trees and all of these different things is important. So the end result is important. But what is critical is the act of collaboration that results in slowly building trust. It is it is an active verb, or whatever the case may be, of community policing. It's not just the end result. I actually believe that the act of collaborating should be more heavily weighted than the actual speed bump that is, you know, designed, or the street lamps that go in, or whatever else final product in the era of COVID. Maybe there's a conversation between members of the Blue community and civilian community about what do we do with crime, food related crimes. How do you want to treat that? It's not, you know, let's all, you know, the police department go out and buy some turkeys and buy some food and hand it out to everyone. Yes, that's not a bad thing, but it is the act of engagement with the community. How do you want to address these issues, and what is the solution? And that's where trust comes from. It's not painful, but it's not immediate. It's just brick by brick by brick that's being built. So
Well, you know, Nadine, there's something. So I want Mark to jump in with something here, because we actually, this is, you know, that environmental design that Wayne talked about is something that we use at work, actually. But our head of security is on, and I would love him to jump in if he feels comfortable sharing a little bit about that. But there was something else you were saying, and now I feel like I've lost my train of thought. So I'm going to let you. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So when you were saying that it's sort of like the act of engaging, that might be more important than the speed bump. This is sort of like the and, right? That we talk about with polarity. I actually feel like it's both, right? We probably need the speed bump, and we need to be engaging in conversations around how we, you know, look at policing in this era of COVID, and give people the speed bump that they need, and making sure that we have the right investments in our community to do those things. And I think that comes from our it does come from our leaders, and it comes from our tax dollars, but it also comes from our businesses in the community and how they're investing their dollars and the types of things they support. Like, everyone sort of understands that they need to support the food bank, but everyone may not understand in the same way that they also need to put resources into mental health programs and into building better relationships with police and their communities. I just think it's, as you said earlier, about educating the community. I think of that broadly. Like, I think all of us need to have a better understanding of how we play an important role in creating the solution, right? In creating the the piece that we want to see, right? I mean,
Absolutely. It
yeah.
is definitely an and we've encountered police agencies that don't understand that it's an and, right? The response is, well, we gave them the speed bump that they want. So that's the difference with community policing. That it absolutely is an and. It is not just the final product. It is the process that leads to the final product. Both are critical in terms of building trust and also in terms of creating safer communities. Without a doubt. Absolutely.
Nadine, I
Mark?
want to say something. So I'm looking here. I don't think Mark is going to speak up, but I didn't know that there were CPTED certifications. So our entire security team at G6 is CPTED certified, which I didn't know before, right? I didn't know that before, but I could tell by the way that they work and what Wayne was describing. So it's so interesting to hear that, to know that.
I hear Mark's voice. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Nadine. How are you? Yeah, no, I
great.
wasn't ignoring you. I'm up in the woods right now, so I was trying to, listen in.
enjoy your,
attention.
yes.
But I will say, I was glad to hear Wayne talk about utilizing CPTED and that approach. And as you mentioned, the team is all certified and we do use it, but we use it to really bridge the gap with law enforcement. So we don't do it in a vacuum. We don't do it ourselves and then walk away from it. We invite law enforcement within the communities to work with it, because usually the issues we're having around our hotels are community issues and not just specific to the hotel. And that helps drive that partnership with law enforcement. So the business community reaching out to law enforcement, bringing them in and partnering is kind of the key to the success. And it really helps drive those relationships. And then it becomes where we're solving this as a group and not just, again, in that vacuum where we're trying to solve one thing. Law enforcement has their own agenda. And a lot of times it can become adversarial if you do it that way. So it's been really helpful for us.
Wow. Can I just tell you, Mark, that just the sound of the birds chirping, I feel calmer already. Like, really? Like, I just feel the stress just leaving. Wow.
That's why I do it.
Beautiful. That's
Wow.
beautiful. Okay, let me do a quick demo of Central. So this is actually speaks to something that Gary talked about, mentioned in terms of agencies not necessarily being equipped or able or even funded, resourced enough to be able to do community policing effectively. There are pockets of agencies that do it well, of police departments that do it well. And so what we've created here is a tool that basically takes in best practices and creates a scorecard of sorts. So we're going to sign in. And this is powered by Kaizen. So Jeff is on this call. If I can just sign in. And this is a demo. This is not, I don't think, an actual agency. This is a demo. But the metrics are consistent across all of the agencies. And what we found is that police departments, police agencies, whether it's just one sergeant or one captain of a precinct, but the police agency itself, when they are oriented toward community policing in these three categories, we find that they are then more effective. So absolutely, like Wayne said, there's got to be some measure of community engagement, right? There's got to be some way of touching the community and of working with the community. And whether it's, coffee with a cop, which seems to be the going favorite, although we've since heard cola with a cop, so the kids are not excluded. That is absolutely required to have positive touches with the community. Officer training, however, is a key area as well, because you can't just take an officer or department agency that has been reared in, for lack of a better word, law enforcement warrior type training, and then throw them into, okay, now go and collaborate with the community and come up with some good solutions. No, it takes specific training and equipping. For some officers, it comes naturally, but not for everyone. And that shouldn't be an impediment for them being able to do this type of work. So training in the area of procedural justice, implicit bias, cultural awareness. I'm sure I'm leaving out some key ones, but those types of trainings, not just tactical and defense training, but some of the softer skills in terms of how to engage. Absolutely, that needs to be done as well, and done on a consistent enough basis that it creates new habits and understanding that kind of goes into day-to-day policing. The third category is organizational development. You're right. If you don't reward officers, if you don't acknowledge officers that do this well, then they're not going to do it, right? So if you're promoting people that, or promoting officers that get the highest number of arrests, or they take the most guns off the street, and so on and so forth, if that's how you rise in the ranks, then that's what you're going to get more of. And so we looked at departments that do actually recognize officers that collaborate successfully with community members, that don't just promote officers based on the number of arrests and so forth. So here is an agency. The dark blue bar is the agency that completed the scorecard. The light blue is the benchmark. Overall gold. And if you drill down into some of the subcategories, you will see what the different ratings mean. Community input, do you engage with the community? For example, do you solicit or disseminate a community survey asking community members what their take is in terms of safety and priorities for the neighborhood, for the community? That would be an example of community input. And the policing philosophy itself within the organization, how is that communicated? What policies do you have in place that would promote and incentivize officers to engage in community policing? The third category is organizational development. Again, the dark blue category is the agency that completed the scorecard, and the light blue is the benchmark. Practice and communication, how do you promote things that I already touched on? Officer wellness is a big one. Officer wellness, I personally believe, and of course it's very presumptuous of me to say that, having never been a police officer, but I personally believe that this type of policing takes more emotional resources than just law enforcement. Engaging with community members and collaborating in a positive way, I think takes more emotional resources. And so officer wellness is key. And let me move on to the next one. Any questions or anything thus far? No. Okay, so we don't just want to police in a vacuum. We actually want to see trends that speak to effectiveness. So these are some metrics that we are trying to collect. There is no national database in the United States for these issues, for these topics or metrics as yet. We are happy to create it. If anyone knows of agencies or organizations that already collect it, we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. I can tell you that. We are happy to work with them and bring in their metrics. But metrics in the area of assaults against officers, service calls per residents, which reasonable minds could differ how you read that. Citizen complaints per officer, again, reasonable minds could differ how you read that. Police misconduct lawsuits and use of force incidents, we want to start seeing downward trends. What we want to see is, if you have a gold score in community policing, are we seeing over time continuous improvement in those metrics that citizens, ordinary folks like myself, care about? Are there less excessive use complaints or lawsuits being filed, and less assaults against officers? So it's safer for community members and it's safer for officers. Those are the types of things that we want to start tracking. And through Central, we believe that it's a start. We have to start somewhere. No one is tracking it in this holistic way until now. And then the final score here, or the metric that we're tracking, is from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting, the UCR data. It's just publicly available data for violent crimes. The dark blue line is the agency, the gold agency, community police agency, and then the light blue is the national average. The gray line right now is fictitious. And we can see that this particular agency is well below the national average for violent crimes. Property crimes, there's some volatility, but still mostly at or below the national average. Here, we're seeing volatility in terms of fatal shootings by police. The data source for this is the Washington Post that has started to collect fatal shootings by police officers through FOIA requests, which are requests for public information and newsletter articles and so forth. And so that is being tracked. Here we see some volatility here with this particular agency. Thankfully, 0 officers feloniously killed in this jurisdiction. So as we build out this tool more, you will be able to filter based on geography, based on demographics. Maybe it's racial, demographics, whatever is relevant to the user, age, gender, right? So we're just going to build it out more so that the police leadership completing the scorecard can benchmark his or her agency against those benchmarks that matter to them. So that is Central. Kaizen, Jeff Anderson's company, just a phenomenal organization that just brought our vision to reality using data and walking us through it. I mean, we were a bunch of lawyers talking about databases, and they were like, why do you keep saying a database? Like, this is not a database. You need a visualization, something. We're like, huh? Isn't it all a database? So it's been quite an exercise. Worked with a lot of phenomenal officers, Wayne, of course, included. But even just the act of collaborating to get to this point has already changed our personal narratives in terms of how we look at law enforcement. It's just the trust that comes from any type of project that's positive in bent and where there's mutual respect. It's inevitable. I would say it is just brain science that the trust and the respect will inevitably come if we start to engage with each other as human beings. Who would have thought that as human beings, humaning, what's the verb of being a human, it can be so hard, right? How hard can it be if you're genetically wired to have brown eyes? How hard can it be to have brown eyes, right? So it's almost like, why is engaging with each other as human beings so challenging? And it's because a lot of different things get in the way. Wayne talked about it, that sometimes, media and other sources, they have a certain objective to magnify what doesn't work. But when you just talk to regular local folks like us and the police that serve us, we're okay to work together. We just have to get through to the other side. So
our brains were, well, I would say it's brain science, right? Our brains were designed to be efficient. And the way that our brains behave in an efficient manner is to make, have these shortcuts. And that's where how our biases are formed, right? It's just based on prior experience. And therefore we can't sort of visualize something that's different than our current experience. So outside of our whatever experience is, we actually have to work at rewiring those things that are sort of naturally programmed into our psyche. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're learning. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what we're trying to bring, frankly, to all, sort of our collective awareness. We're raising our collective awareness about just the fact that, bias is normal and natural. But some of the consequences of that bias are what we're working against. And that's going to take all of us just engaging. So any questions about Central? Because I have one for Nadine before we sign off. We're pretty close to the end.
Can I jump in on what one of the comments that both you and Nadine just made? And it has to do with the technology and the fact that, is it very easy to always be a human being? Sure. But we have also developed ways of separating each other to make it easier to communicate, which has in fact pulled us further and further apart. Some of that technology are also contributing to the negative messaging and the development of those internal biases that we have that come into play on every single interaction that occurs between a police officer and an individual. So as we're talking about how we're going to fix this, one of the ways, as we mentioned at the very beginning, is to develop forums like this, to have these conversations, to develop methods of balancing against the negative messaging that each and every one of us hear on a daily basis that's contributing, even subconsciously, to that division between you and me.
Dwayne, I'm going to disagree with you, which I don't do often.
I know.
I was going to end there. I was
No.
like, that was perfect. But of
No.
course, Nadine and I disagree.
We're going to disagree, and I'm going to tell you something. Yes, the viral videos certainly are impactful and can influence how this divide. But do you know what, and I hate to use the word Trump because people have like a bad reaction sometimes, but do you know what trumps that? A personal narrative and experience. So because of my interactions with you, with Giles, with Mark, with so many other members of law enforcement and former law enforcement, when I see, the 9-year-old pepper sprayed in Rochester, don't get me wrong. I mean, I have a 10-year-old son. My heart breaks. But my response is not the same because I have that personal experience with law enforcement that are just phenomenal human beings wanting to do and are doing phenomenal work. So if we have that personal narrative and experience, I guarantee whatever we're seeing on the news will still be impactful, but it's not going to have the same power to divide us, and vice versa.
So I see Gary has his finger up. So let me just respond, because you probably won't believe me when I say this, but I agree with you 100%. And I was in no way implying that the negative messaging that we need to balance will fix this. It won't. And the reality is that it's a component of what's necessary to fix this. But you're right. That personal relationship that you just talked about, the fact that you know certain police officers that have taught you how this needs to be done, that have very openly and honestly spoken about the history of law enforcement and how it's impacted people of color and how it, grew partially out of the slave trade, that existed here in the United States, and how the industry basically was formed and developed through the most racially divided times of our history. The fact that you and I have had that conversation gives you a different perspective. And you're 1,000% right on that. But even that relationship is just a component of what it's going to take to actually fix this. Like, we honestly don't have enough time today to talk about everything that's necessary to fix this, but this is a start, and it's a component of it. So I know Gary wanted to say something.
I was just going to make the point that it's actually a combination of what you've both said that's the ringing endorsement for community policing, because the reality is policing probably interacts with about 5% of the population in any given year. So you have 95% of the population who are hearing the narratives from the media and forming their opinions on that. So if we can't dramatically increase the interactions that policing have with people, then we need to target them. So what we need to do is we need to get community policing into communities where the greatest risk of crime is, the greatest risk of adverse relationships between that community and policing are, and allow those relationships within those communities to be changed. I personally think that spending a huge amount of time in community policing in upper middle class neighborhoods is a waste of resources. We need to be in communities where traditionally we've had adverse relationships because of the relationship between policing and poverty and the criminalization of being poor, which is universal. We don't have the history of policing as a tool of the slave trade in Ireland, because we were founded by Peel before he founded the Met. So there is initially a more community-based piece, but we've had relationships break down with communities generally around poverty, generally around drugs. And now, as we have 10% of the population not born in Ireland, which is a dramatic increase in 10 years, now race is becoming an issue. And we're starting. And one of the reasons why race is becoming an issue here is because those narratives from abroad are setting relationships that we haven't had an opportunity to form yet
Mm.
because they're too new
Mhm.
into tram lines that are inherited from other places, and mainly from either the UK with its colonial background or from the US with its huge cultural influence on Ireland. You know, from
That's so very
media, from
interesting. And you know, I would say, I mean, these points at the end are just so powerful, and they're reinforcing the importance of the need for these conversations. Couple thoughts. One is, yes, we absolutely need more of these conversations, right? Because we need to get the 95% to have these experiences of the 5%, the positive ones, right? Because of the 5% that interact, like, I'm not sure what percentage of those are positive interactions. So, but to have more experiences like the ones that Nadine is describing. The question is, how do you even get there when you have so many people who are so resistant right now, and who have such such trauma, frankly, around the idea of even engaging with law enforcement. So that's, you know, I think that's one of the $1 million questions that we have. But we are 1 minute away from wrapping up. And, you know, as you said, Wayne, we could, this is like a, you know, we could go on and on and on.
On and
There's just
on.
so much ground that we could cover. Gary, I really love that you joined this call today. I love the international perspective,
Yeah.
because I think it just underscores that there's so much more that unites us than divides us, and that these are human issues, right? And that we have to figure out how we work through.
Absolutely. And if I could just add, I mean, Ireland, take a lesson from what's going on in the United States, get out in front of it, right? Try to learn from our mistakes and get out in front of it. So that is what an incredible perspective you brought to this, and the changing demographics in Ireland. That is just absolutely amazing, but it's going to come with its tensions, and people are going to come with their own baggage, just as you said. So that is absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, that's it. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Really appreciate, this is our first attempt to meet the moment, right? And our first story, our first conversation, but it won't be our last. And
Mhm.
before I go, so Samina is not
And-
mad at me.
And special
have-
thanks to Chief Harris, who was just phenomenal and awesome.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Chief Harris, for joining us.
It was a great start. Great start to the series. Awesome.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think this conversation was just so engaging. Mark had to leave, but he thanked us and he said that it really inspired him. Sorry, I just want to share with you guys really quickly. Thanks, Ashley. Just so you could see the upcoming dates for our speaker series, April 24th, and that date may shift, but right now, April 24th, where we'll be talking about our mindfulness training that has been created. And then May 25th, around that date, we'll be talking about turning pain to purpose, and really looking at engaging how we can engage with companies to drive systemic change and communities. Polarity Thinking on June 19th, bringing police and communities together. And then on or around July 10th, we'll be celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the initiative. So we're super excited to continue these conversations, and hope you'll continue to join us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.
Can I make one request before we go?
Of course. Yeah.
Well, I was going to comment on it. I know we've long since run out of time, but also include officer wellness in there, because one of the things Nadine mentioned earlier is incredibly important that we unfortunately do not spend enough time talking about. And here's why. Consider this. There's not a policer on this planet, and Gary can attest to this. If you pin a badge on your chest, you do not walk away from this career unscathed. You just don't.
Mhm.
You will encounter things that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. Policing cannot be done properly if the men and women that go out there to do it are not physically, emotionally, and psychologically healthy. So I'm strongly encouraging us to have a conversation on officer wellness.
So, okay, so I'm going to change, Serena, this is for us to change the name of the topic. So it says Operation Brain Strategies. That is really all about officer wellness. It's my mindfulness training for law enforcement, but it's related to officer wellness in our officer wellness initiative. So we'll make sure that we include that language so people understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I hope you'll join us for that, Officer Harris, because Gina, who will be discussing that, she talks a lot about how training for law enforcement officers, like wellness, mindfulness training, is different because they're coming from a place of trauma. Every single officer has faced something, and so it has to have a different type of training than someone who hasn't gone through trauma. So please join us.
Nadine used the word
Absolutely.
earlier,
I'd love
which
to.
Nadine used the word earlier, which I think is really important, and it stands. Use the word warrior in relation to its, and it's something I would watch from when you have notable officers in the US retire and you get their biography. They talk about their military service is almost always included in this biography. I personally would question the compatibility between military service and law enforcement. My personal opinion is that law enforcement should be cranky social workers. Obviously, you need some tactical awareness, and you need some of the similar pieces that military officers have and military personnel have. But if you go in with a conflict mindset, you're at nothing. You're never going to be police. Then you're an occupying force at that stage. And it's something. So something about the recruitment is possibly part of this conversation as well. You know?
I think we're going to have a lot of conversations, guys. Well, thank you again. And, feel free to email, stay in touch with us. Let's just keep this, conversation going.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the
definitely.
rest of your weekend.
Love
Thank
to.
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. So
Bye,
good
guys.
to see you.
Take
Thanks
care.
a lot.
Thanks, Wayne. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye.